Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Buddy podcast with your postnatal expert Peter Lapp. That, as always, would be me. This is the podcast for the 26th of June 2022. And date before music means I have a guest on. And yeah, as always, you're in luck. I'm talking postpartum anxiety with postpartum anxiety expert Allison Lieberman. We're talking many things. Why is it often misdiagnosed or missed? How can you spot the signs? Why does the wider public, including healthcare professionals, not realize that this is a thing? How can you diagnose it yourself? What does it look like? And of course, what can you do about it? And how can you overcome it? It's a wonderful chat. Alison is a very engaging person to talk to, and she really knows her stuff. So without further ado, here we go. So just how common is postpartum anxiety?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the actual statistic is about 10% of women. I would say that that's probably an underreported statistic, as most of them are.
It always is, yes.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, postpartum anxiety doesn't get a lot of airtime as much as postpartum depression for a lot of reasons. One being that postpartum depression is the only postpartum mental illness, for lack of a better way of saying it, that is an official diagnosis. Postpartum anxiety is not an official diagnosis. And so I don't think that people really realize when someone's struggling with it. But then in addition to that, a lot of the symptoms of postpartum anxiety are really normalized for women when they aren't necessarily normal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, right, that leads us straight into the next one. What are, right? I'm just the jackass. I'll ask the stupid question. There
are no stupid questions.
What are those symptoms, Allison?
Yeah. So they're not so different from general anxiety, except that it can be heightened after having a baby. And a lot of the times the anxiety is around the baby. Yeah. So the inability to stop the racing thoughts, having intrusive thoughts of something bad happening or intrusive images of something bad happening to the baby, feeling like you can never turn your brain off, the panic, the overwhelm, feeling like there's just dread in general, dreading each situation, each scenario, and really a lack of sleep or inability to eat or eating too much. Those types of things are really common. And a lot of that gets overlapped with, you're a new parent. So of course you're going to be thinking about the baby and all the baby's needs, and you're not sleeping anyway. So it's nothing to really be concerned about. And that's sort of where things get dicey if you're not necessarily trained to suss out which is the normal trajectory of new parenthood and what is the anxiety portion.
Yeah, because I suppose the normal trajectory is slight concern and a bit of sleeplessness and all that sort of stuff. But when it starts to take over your life, like normal anxiety tends to do, when the, let's say, more irrational thoughts come in. One of my friends was talking, he lives out in LA, and he was talking about every time he was walking the baby, he has a stroller, and he was walking the baby, every time he had this fear that this big eagle would swoop out of the sky and grab the baby. Or this cougar, where he says cougar or pumas or whatever the hell they have there. He's like, these things they're going to come and they're going to grab my kid every single time he was walking the baby. And he said, I know that's not normal. He said, I've never seen one, or mountain lions or whatever they're called.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I'm a little north of LA, there aren't very many cougars out here.
I have no idea what the difference is, what the difference between a mountain lion and a cougar, but it was something along those lines. Yeah.
I love two things about that story. One is that like you're talking about a male that is bringing this up. And I know for sure male postpartum anxiety gets no airtime, right? Nobody's talking about that. And the irrationality of the fears, right? Like, what are the chances that an eagle is going to be flying in LA and is going to spot this person's baby, dive into the stroller, take the baby and run before anybody can do anything? I think that totally speaks to the intrusiveness of the thoughts and the overwhelm and the irrationality around what the anxiety looks like. And, you know, your friend could obviously identify like, why am I thinking this? This is doesn't feel right. But that would be enough to make somebody not want to take their child out on a walk anymore, right? And so that's where it starts. And you think like, I just don't want to focus on that. So I'm just not going to do that anymore. But what you're actually doing is increasing the likelihood that anxiety is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because now you've said, oh yeah, that likelihood is higher. And that's why I'm not going to go outside.
Yeah. Because you're validating that event or potential event actually happening. Isn't it? It's like everybody has experience with the dreaded phone call. As in, you have to phone a company about XYZ, or you have to phone a person XYZ. And the longer you put that off, the more difficult that conversation gets in your head.
Absolutely.
And by the time we make the call, of course, it's never a biggie, right? It's always less than we actually build it up in our head as it's going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like you said, it's interesting because what you're describing gets very little, like you said, postpartum depression, that's the biggie, right? When we have a 6-week checkup in the UK, you go to your GP 6 weeks postpartum, and the baby gets a checkup, and the woman gets asked basically if she wants to kill herself or not. And if the answer is no, well, then you're good and you're on your merry way, right? Because that's another life saved. I'm not sure postpartum anxiety actually gets checked at all at any stage.
It doesn't. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but I know in the US, at the 6-week checkup for the mom, and then also any checkup for the baby, pretty much, I think, within the first year, because that's typically the postpartum depression timeframe is 1 year. They give out this questionnaire. It's called the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Screening. And what they do is they ask like 10 questions, I believe. And it's the questions you're talking about, like, are you feeling sad? Are you crying for no reason? Do you have thoughts of wanting to harm yourself? Do you have thoughts of wanting to harm your baby? All of those questions. And usually moms fill it out and maybe the doctor looks at it. I think more if you're lucky, probably more likely they're just looking at the questions that are saying whether or not you're having thoughts of harming yourself or the baby. Yeah. And if those are checked no, which more times than not, they're checked no, even if it's true, then that's it. And that's all the screening that happens. And it's only screening for depression. It's not screening for anxiety. It's not screening for OCD, which is, one level up from anxiety in terms of how it manifests. And we're missing that piece of at least getting referrals for these women that are coming in and struggling, right? Or they'll say, how are you sleeping? I know I was asked that a lot when I would go to take my kids in, and it'd be like, not good. And it'd be like, yeah, we know. But nobody was asking me why I wasn't sleeping, because my kid was sleeping. I wasn't sleeping. And so then it was like, okay, well, I guess that's normal. Nobody's asking me, so it must be normal that I'm also not sleeping, even though the baby is.
Yeah, because that's a really odd one, isn't it? It's the follow-up, and I get it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've spoken about this before. GPs, generally speaking, don't have the time for any sort of in-depth sort of thing. And also, I mean, one of my clients is a GP, and she sees, I don't know, 3,000 people, 2,500 people a year, 5 of whom are postpartum. So there's no chance she has the knowledge. She sees more people with the sniffles and all that sort of stuff and flu-like symptoms. So that's what she focuses on. She doesn't have the expertise to pick up on postpartum anxiety or normal anxiety or any sort of thing. It's almost a tick box exercise. And you have 10 minutes in the UK, you get 10 minutes per GP appointment, pretty much. And
it doesn't feel like enough time, but
no, I mean,
I think it's the same here.
it definitely isn't enough time, because a private GP over here that you pay for and pay a substantial amount of money for gives you 45 minutes. And then they have 15 minutes to make notes and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Some clients who are private GPs. And that seems to be more beneficial because, I mean, usually these appointments get combined. Like you said, you have the baby gets a checkup, and then you are the afterthought, as is always the way with women postpartum. So you have the last minute, by the way, you're okay, right? And now get the hell out of here because I have other people to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, in my perfect world, my expectation isn't that, you know, general practitioners do the work. I think if anything, it's that they step aside, you know, like it's totally fine that they don't have the time to do that. Like I totally get that. And it's truly, in the grand scheme of things, not that much more expensive to have a case manager that focuses on that for your clients. Right. And I think that that's what's missing, is that we're missing the middle person. And I think OBs should be able to focus on that a little bit more, as opposed to a general practitioner or even a pediatrician. That's not their specialty. Why would they do that? But I know when I was pregnant, in my second pregnancy, my husband was hospitalized and he had almost died, and we had a toddler. And I went to my OB and I said, you know, I'm freaking out. I'm panicking. I'm anxious. I don't know what to do. I used to be on medication, but I was told when I got pregnant, I couldn't take it anymore. And I'm feeling like I'm spiraling, you know, and I'm a therapist. So like, I know all the things I need to be doing and none of them are working, you know? And he was like, yeah, like, that's really hard. You should keep going to therapy. And I was like, I go every week. Like, I don't know what else to do. And then, you know, 3 months later, I had my baby, and then it was COVID. Like, I had my daughter the first week of COVID happening and shutting down in the US. And at my 6-week checkup, which was via phone, not even video, someone called me. It was like, all right, like, everything good? And that was it. That was my checkup. And so at no point had somebody said, like, you know, 3 months ago, you were in here panicking, having a really hard time, saying you needed help. How are you now that the world is shut down and you have a newborn at home? And, you know, like, there's just no, I guess bedside manner is the best term, but I don't know, like, why at any point would I feel comfortable coming forward when no one seems to be helping me, even when I'm telling them I need the help? Yeah.
It's basically, for want of a better phrase, it's like really shitty customer service.
Yes.
Basically, I mean, if you phone your broadband provider and you complain about a fault with your line, the agent makes a note, and the next time you phone about something, the agent goes over your notes and says, oh yes, in my case, Miss Lap, I can see you phoned about this before. How's this going now? I'm terribly sorry, blah, blah, blah. At least there is some semblance of continuation of dealing with an issue.
Yeah.
Within the medical profession, even though everybody makes notes, I'm not saying doctors don't make notes.
No, we have to.
Exactly. That's kind of a thing. I mean, but
legally and ethically.
Exactly. But there's very little referring back to notes. There is a lot of note taking, and I'm not saying this is what it's for, but it seems to, from a layman's perspective, from outside perspective, it seems to be an insurance thing almost. I have to make notes because my insurance company wants me to make notes, because if it goes wrong, I'm going to get sued, and I can say, I made notes, I did the paperwork. But there's very little note taking and referring when it comes to, from a, let's say, customer service perspective, as in how I need to refer back to stuff.
Yeah. And like when we think about it from a due diligence standpoint, which I think all people in some sort of helping profession are agreeing to do when they get their license, right? It's like, you have to do your due diligence. And as long as you're doing your due diligence, then you're doing the minimum requirement. And I think, you know, as a therapist, I have to have notes, and yes, it's for payment, it's for insurance purposes, it's all of that. But I'm seeing 20 clients at a time, and I can remember what we talked about last time. And I can remember something that my client was struggling with 3 years ago, because I'm only seeing a small portion of clients. But when you have 500 clients on your docket that you're seeing once a year, the minimum due diligence you should be doing is going back in your notes and seeing what happened last time, right? And I think, I imagine in areas where, you know, because I know in the UK, it's more universal healthcare, right? So like, I imagine there it's even harder for doctors to be able to do that, because I imagine their caseloads are so much higher. But I think that at minimum, we should be putting like an asterisk somewhere. Like, this was important last time. Like, let's check in on that again.
Have a little flag on there, just going, next time this patient comes in, ask about this. We've lost a family physician in the UK. We used to have, you know, I used to have like the town doctor, and he knew everybody. And every time you popped into the doctor, they'd ask, instead of saying, you know, losing weight and exercise would be beneficial, they'd just go, have you given up smoking yet, Pete? Right? That sort of conversation would happen. That stopped. So you're no longer guaranteed to see the same doctor. You're just part of a medical practice.
Yeah.
And so you go from Dr. Taylor to Dr. Smith. And Dr. Smith, if it doesn't refer back to the notes that Dr. Taylor made, you're just not going to get picked up on.
Right.
But, you know, we can complain about the medical profession all we want. It's not getting us anywhere.
No. But I will say that, like, in my work and in my advocacy and all of that, like, I have a podcast as well. And the whole focus is to really bring light to the moms, that they have the ability to advocate for themselves. And I think that we go to these doctors, and it's true, like, we can't fix the medical profession. And we also have to know that it is our responsibility, because nobody's fixing the medical profession, to say, I need this. Where do I get it? Right? Where do I go? And I think, especially in postpartum, it is like definitely postpartum mental health. Like, people don't know that they can ask for that. And postpartum pelvic floor help as well, right? Like, I have myself and tons of clients who desperately need pelvic floor assistance, and nobody is asking those questions. And it's amazing how much of a world there is in terms of postnatal pelvic floor therapy, and nobody's asking about it.
I know it's absolutely insane, because obviously that's kind of what I do, the diastasis recti and all that sort of stuff. And I keep bringing up indeed, you're quite right. I had a functional health doctor on not that long ago, a properly qualified one, not a hacky one that just makes stuff up and calls it functional health, but someone who went to school, who got a proper, as in a medical degree first, and then added stuff to it.
Right.
So she had a lot more credibility than, say, someone who just took an online course. And what she was saying was, that you have to be responsible for your own health. And we are very much used to referring to the doctor as the doctor having all the knowledge, and therefore they are there to be listened to. And we just walk in like we walk into any garage when our car breaks down. You speak to the mechanic. Yeah, my car's broken down. My body doesn't work, right? And the mechanic goes, well, it's an expensive one, or there's nothing I can do, depending on whether they fix it. But we don't approach it from I need you to fix this. My car doesn't feel right, or my body doesn't feel right, or my mental health isn't right. I need you to get me to speak to a guy or a girl that can fix this for me. And that goes for mental health. It goes for pelvic floor problems. I know in France, and this keeps coming up, so I'll otherwise I'll get emails. In France, you get 6 physiotherapy appointments as standard when you're postpartum. And that goes, I know. It's almost like that's the way it should be. 6 physio, and then they're like what they call mummy MOT sort of things here. So your pelvic floor, diastasis recti, all that sort of stuff gets checked out by someone who does that specific thing for a living. So not a general physio, not someone who also looks at knees and all that sort of stuff, but someone who only cares about pelvic floor, diastasis recti, all that sort of thing. Because 6 sessions is generally speaking all it takes to start to address these sort of problems.
My mind is blown right now.
I know, it's almost like a better system is possible. The problem, I think, what we have in the UK and the US is that we are very keen on treating the health of the baby. We're pretty good at that in both the UK and the US.
Yeah.
Babies are pretty well looked after.
Yes.
Husbands are also pretty well looked after. When I don't know whether you had this experience in your antenatal class or your NCT class, whatever they call them. That you have almost an entire module where the person teaching the class is, now, ladies, when you give birth, the husband might start to feel a little bit neglected. So also look after the blah, 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 blah. And of course, every woman in there will sit there. Okay, right? Sure, I'm only here to pick up phone numbers and make mommy friends and all that sort of stuff. But okay, I'll take this on board. I'll be nicer to my husband, so to speak, when he's being a douche. And there is very little about postpartum physical health or mental health for the woman in those antenatal classes. It just does not get mentioned. It does not get a look in. And that is really something that simply has to change. Especially because, the physical things can be sorted. The physical things are easy to fix. Almost I always say diastasis recti, pelvic floor problems, 99 out of 100 times is just exercise. And it's a piece of piss once you know what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, again, it's just questions. If anybody just asked simple questions, the direction of healthcare would just be really different, right? So I know that my own pelvic floor experience is that I had one child, and every time I sneezed, every time I coughed, every time I got sick, I would pee.
Yeah.
And it was any person I talked to was it's normal, it's normal, it's normal. Yeah. And I was God, this sucks. I have to bring extra pants with me everywhere I go. This is just how I have to live the rest of my life. I'm 30 years old, And when I was pregnant the second time, it was this really heavy pressure in my pelvis for most of my pregnancy that I did not have with my first one. And when I brought it up to my doctor, I'm really nervous. My son came early, so I had a lot of anxiety around my daughter coming early. So I was bringing it up as I'm scared that my baby's about to fall out. Right. Yeah. And I was it hurts. I'm really nervous. And they were yeah, it's normal. Second babies, they just sit lower. And I was okay, so it's just normal to feel this pressure all the time. Right. And then I have my second baby and of course, I didn't do any pelvic floor work. So I'm still sneezing and peeing and all the stuff. And then I was listening to a podcast maybe a year ago, and it was yeah, it's not normal. there is work that you can do. And I was like, why has nobody told me this? Right? Like, because even my own mom, and she doesn't know better. She's a teacher. She's not a doctor. And she's like, yeah, that's just normal. That's just what happens. And I'm like, but it's not. Like, why are we suffering? Right. Yeah. And so I get a referral and they send me to not a pelvic floor PT, but a urogynecologist.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Who tells me that I can have surgery if I want to. And I was like, well, that feels drastic. Like, it's not that bad. Like, is that my only option? Well, you could do physical therapy if you want to start there. Yeah, let's do that. That seems less invasive. Yeah. So let's do that. And then it was like, oh my gosh, like there's this whole other world I had no idea existed. And it's sort of like twofold. One, like nobody is talking to me as a patient about it. But two, like any information I have on postpartum health, wellness, mental health is all information I've sought out on my own. Yeah. I didn't receive any training on this. Right. And so then you're like, well, obviously our medical system isn't meeting the needs because no one's training them. Yeah. And that's sort of what got me to this place of helping women postpartum and focusing on postpartum anxiety is that like I suffered for a really long time and I'm a therapist and I'm licensed and I have a practice and I don't know that this exists and that this is a common issue. And if you're thinking about, even if we're going to talk about the statistic of 10% of women have postpartum anxiety, it's still a significant portion of the population that we're neglecting.
And this is what my issue is with most of the postpartum stuff. It's when you say things like, yeah, this is normal. No, it's common. Yeah. It's common, but it's not normal. Yes. Just because something happens a lot doesn't mean it's right. Right. And there's a big difference between the two. As in when clients come to me or when people sign up to my little website and they say, I have leakage. Yeah, okay. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's fine. It's embarrassing if I drink too much and then pee myself. Sure. But if you're just postpartum and you have pelvic floor issues, that's not embarrassing. That's a physical injury. Being pregnant and giving birth, whether it's C-section or a natural birth, as they say, is a very traumatic experience on the body. Yeah, it just is. It's like a car crash. It is messy, and it sucks on all levels, which is why your body makes you forget about it pretty much as soon as you've given birth, and you get that happy, quite often that overwhelming hormonal response of everything is nice and amazing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's like that serotonin.
The serotonin boost, and that which makes you forget just how horrible it was. Otherwise, you'd never have a kid again. You wouldn't have had your daughter if you'd remembered just how much your original labor sucked. And how traumatic that really is. Yeah, and that's completely natural and it's completely normal. But all the issues are, if I have a shoulder injury, I need to get that seen to. I need to get that fixed. Right. And it can be fixed because these are muscular issues. And it's the same with mental health issues. Mental health issues, especially when brought on by things like pregnancy or exacerbated by things like pregnancy, are all things that can be worked through. These are not like, you won't be anxious forever, is what I'm saying, as long as you get help. If you just leave it, these things don't get better by themselves, right?
Right. Yeah, unless there's just truly like a hormonal reaction, which is like when we're talking about like baby blues, right? Like that is definitely a hormonal response. And yes, that does get better. And you may have really terrible baby blues and then be able to, move past that after a few weeks. And that's great. And that's different than your experience. And your experience, and I think we don't put enough emphasis on this, is that like you can have a trigger when you become a parent from something that happened when you were 5 that you thought you never needed to think about again. right?
Yeah.
But when you have this little tiny human that's dependent on you, and then you realize, you know, how vulnerable they are and how vulnerable you are now that they're outside of you, right?
Yeah.
Like it can bring so much emotion back. And one of the most common things I hear people say is like, yeah, but that happened so long ago. I thought I moved on. And it's like, yeah, you did when you didn't have kids. You moved past it in whatever way, whether it was a productive way or not. And now it's back. So you can either work through it again or sit with it, but it doesn't go away. It just manifests differently. So the other thing that comes up a lot is like this like mom rage, right? And where does that stem from? Where it stems from unresolved trauma, unresolved anxiety, unresolved depression. And then we're yelling at our toddlers and we don't know why.
That sounds remarkably common.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds, that is just everybody, right? And this is everybody's a little bit messed up because of their parents, right? That is just the way it is. Everybody's got baggage. At some stage, everybody, or almost everybody, I'm massively generalizing here, I'm aware of this, but a lot of people, let me put it that way, turn into their parents when they are parenting, even if they didn't want to. Like all of a sudden that switch flicks, and all of a sudden you are your parent, whether it's your mom or your dad, and indeed you're shouting at either kids or someone else, right? If it's misdirected frustration and all that sort of stuff. And it's interesting that you mentioned the baby blues, because I was going to ask about this, because one of the reasons, as one of my former interviews from a long time ago, we did something on postnatal depression, and they were like, okay, but the reason your 6-week checkup with regards to the woman is at 6 weeks is because the baby blues has disappeared after 3 to 4 weeks, right? If you ask someone whether they're unhappy 2 weeks postpartum, they are much more likely to say, yes, I'm miserable and this is difficult and this sucks, than they are 6 weeks postpartum, because the hormones have changed slightly. That's not the case with anxiety, is it?
It is and it isn't, with an asterisk.
As always.
As always. But I think that, like, yes, absolutely. Like, we don't want to assess a mom immediately after birth and make a judgment call based on that. And if we're trying to gauge where they're at 6 weeks, why aren't we assessing them pre-birth, immediately after birth, and then at 6 weeks, right? So that you see what is the trajectory of their mood and their anxiety levels, right? Because somebody could be perfectly fine emotionally going into their planned C-section at 37 weeks, right? Yeah. And then have a tough time adjusting in the baby blues phase, and then it doesn't get better, right? So we're missing a lot of that follow-up piece to really be able to gauge that 6 weeks. And when we're asking questions on a questionnaire, it is so easy to lie on a questionnaire. I'm sorry.
Especially if you think it's embarrassing, right?
Right.
Especially if you're like, I can't tell people this.
Yeah. And like, I know when I knew that there was something quote unquote wrong in terms of my own experience, is that I would lay down at night and I would close my eyes and I would have these, and it happened both times, these intense visions of my kids drowning in a pool. Right. We don't own a pool. My kids obviously weren't walking. They were newborns, but like I was having these like intense images. And if someone were to ask me to write that down on a piece of paper, I would have never done it, because I would have been scared that someone would have been like, oh, you want your kids to drown in a pool, right? And that's not the case. I'm having this image because my brain is trying to say, hey, be prepared. This could happen. Yeah. Don't let this happen, right? And so I think that it makes sense. And I think that we're still missing like a lot of the puzzle. A lot of the puzzle.
So what would you say? Because obviously, because that's sort of thing is as far as I'm aware, just not available in any sort of Western country that I know about, or even China and Hong Kong and all those sort of places that I've spoken to people about, that sort of thing doesn't exist. How would you say women can make sure that they get the help they need at the right stages? Is there anything, like when you're talking about the questionnaires, when you're talking about the feelings, would it help if they themselves, when you again talking ownership for your health and all that sort of stuff, if you yourself write down, as in, keep a journal, right? I'm going into my planned C-section at 37 weeks. This is how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Spouse postpartum. Would that help? Do you think that's beneficial, that people themselves start keeping track of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in any work I do with anybody, I always encourage tracking your mood and your anxiety, just so that you could truly understand what your baseline is, right? So we all have anxiety in one way or another, because it's important for our survival, right? So like your friend who's afraid of mountain lions stealing his children, right? Like that's an important anxiety to have, because when he sees the mountain lion, his body needs to know to run or to not move, if that's I don't know how to respond to a mountain lion. Right? But whatever the case is, your body needs to be able to do that without overthinking. And so if your baseline anxiety is around a 2 or 3, like that's good. That is a healthy level of anxiety. I think that if you're tracking it and you're paying attention, it doesn't have to be anything intense. You could just literally write a number down between 1 to 10, 10 being, I am having a panic attack, right? 1 being, I don't know, I'm asleep or on medication. Whatever, yeah. So, really being able to track that in terms of like, if you're at a 5 to 8 and it's not getting better, then I often see, I mean, I'm all over like Facebook groups for moms and postpartum and all of that. And I often see the number one suggestion is call your doctor and tell them you're struggling. They'll help you. And I don't want to discourage people from reaching out for help in general, but that is not good advice. Because to the point of everything that we've talked about, they don't have the bandwidth to know who to refer you to. They're going to say you need a therapist or you need a psychiatrist. Go call your insurance company. And what happens when you do that is you then get a list of people who may or may not be qualified to meet your needs that you just call, and hopefully they respond. And if they do, maybe they have availability, maybe they don't, and maybe they can help you and maybe they can't. And so by the time you actually get to a therapist, who knows what you're getting and how you're getting it, right? So, in a very, very dream world, we would have people tracking their own emotions and a space where people can find someone faster who's available. So like Postpartum Support International is a good start, right? Like they just launched their it's not a hotline. What is it called? Helpline. Helpline. Yes. They like to very much emphasize it's not a hotline, but to be able to call them and say like, who's accepting new clients, who is in network with my insurance and can see me right away, right? Like those are the types of things we need to be pushing more, instead of call your family doctor and hope that they can help you. So,
and this is what I always say. Good on you for hanging out in the Facebook groups and all that sort of stuff. I can't bring myself to do it. It drives me up the wall. I have a lovely, let's say formerly assistant, Jess, who always sends me stuff from diastasis recti support forums and all that sort of stuff. And almost all the advice on them is wrong. Almost inevitably, people are giving advice when they're not really qualified to give advice. Let me put it that way. They're well-intentioned. I'm not saying that they're not. They're trying to help. They just don't really know what they're talking about. They only have their lived experience. So unlike yourself, you're qualified and you have lived experience. I'm obviously qualified with no postpartum lived experience because I'm a boy.
Right.
But I know how the human body works. But there is, if you only have lived experience, then you can only relate. And that's important, and that helps a lot of people. But it's a terrible place to give advice from, because if you're in any sort of support forum or support meeting or whatever, these people don't have all the information that they need to have to make any sort of judgment call on what you should be doing.
Yes.
And when you were talking earlier about postpartum, anything you found out postpartum, you had to figure out for yourself. Well, we all know that the internet is a minefield.
Yeah.
of just bullshit and just nonsense, and really fancy looking websites filled with people that seem to know what they are talking about, but they could well be. Well, if you're an experienced professional, you would just go, no, that's wrong, because you see through the BS immediately. YouTube is full of them. For postpartum things, I've seen people with millions of views on their videos, and you just think everything you just said is wrong.
Right.
And I think, these people are good at YouTube. They're not necessarily good at what you're looking for them for. They're just, they know YouTube, they know Instagram, and they are excellent at promoting themselves on those platforms. And that's a skill. I'm just saying these are not necessarily people you want to hang out with or take advice from.
And I think the biggest piece about lived experience versus knowledge is that, lived experience comes from your own story and what works for you, which is great. And it can be useful. And I, of course, pull from my own lived experience. And it's not always generalizable and individualized, right? So when you're seeing a professional and talking with a professional, they can really guide you on what works best in your own situation, right? So I imagine with diastasis stuff that on a Facebook group, someone is saying, pick something up this way. And it's please don't ever do that, but it's they're only going based off of what they know because of their own experience. And this other person may have a huge gap between their muscles and that person had a smaller one, and their recovery was different, and their pain is different, and their threshold is different. And there's so many nuances to it. And we're a society of wanting the quickest answer as fast as possible. And I think that the internet is wonderful and horrible for the same reason.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to mental health issues, like what you were saying with regards to phone your GP and they will give you help. They will help you. Well, no, indeed, quite often they don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the knowledge to do so. Things like this advice. I did an interview about migraines not that long ago, migraine headaches, which are very common postpartum as well. And the advice used to be given is sit in a dark room with an ice pack or something like that for 15 minutes, you'll be fine. Typical Hollywood advice. Which just doesn't work. As in for the vast majority of and the problem with giving that sort of advice or taking that sort of advice and it not working is then you've just put up another hurdle that leads towards I will never get better. So like what your mom was talking about when you mentioned about the postpartum leakage and all that sort of stuff, as Kitty snores in the background. So that wasn't me. So it then becomes that's just the norm.
Yeah.
And that is for me the single saddest thing about a lot of postpartum issues. Whether you have postpartum anxiety, depression, all this, or physical issues or back pain or whatever, these things can almost inevitably always be fixed with the help of a professional.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're going in the right direction and someone is guiding you in the right direction. And I'm a therapist, but I've also am about to be launching a coaching course on postpartum anxiety. And the reason why I started it was because I was like, I wish there was a book or a binder or something that they gave you when you left the hospital. Right. And you don't open it. You just take it, right? Like not expecting you to read anything. But when something comes up, you're able to turn to a page that says leakage. You flip it open and it tells you, here's the people that can help you. Find this person, right? Like it doesn't have to be a specific person. Just look for a pelvic floor therapist. Look for a Pilates class that could be helpful. Like whatever it is that you feel like could be beneficial in that. And then you can call that person. I think we're missing that piece of like,
sure, absolutely.
This is what's wrong. How do I fix it? Send me in the right direction without giving me 18 different people I have to go through first.
Yeah. And indeed have it come from a credible source. So just your healthcare provider, your hospital, or whatever. I think in Scotland, we have something called the baby box. Everyone who gives birth, when you have a baby, the government sends you out a baby box, and there's loads of stuff in the diapers and all that sort of stuff.
Interesting.
I know, it's nice. It's the Swedes did it first, and therefore, and the Scottish government thought that's a good idea. Let's give these people some stuff.
Sweden knows what's up.
Sweden does know what's up. They pay a few pennies more in taxes, but they get their money's worth. Let me put it that way. I tried to get leaflets about diastasis recti in the box, and nobody cared.
No.
But that is the thing. The postpartum mom, the woman, still gets ignored to quite a large extent. I think the folder, what you're talking about, that would be the business, right? That would just be it. I mean, indeed, leakage. You don't need to Google anything. You don't need to feel your way through loads of information. You just need to, you grab your folder, your binder, and all the information is there. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that you can include, here's where you get free diapers. Instead of sending it as we call it like medical gaslighting or gaslighting in general, which is like, we're going to send you this box because we want to be helpful, but really we're not helping you, but we want you to think we are. And so here you go. Right. And the intention is great, right? Sending a baby box sounds great. We don't have that here, but what is the real purpose of it is the better question. And that you couldn't get a diastasis flyer or pamphlet in there is telling.
Which I offered to pay for, by the way.
Right.
I actually said, I will give you these things. I will pay for them myself. I'll just put them in there. Because let's be honest, it's good for my sort of thing as well. I said, these people can get free access. I won't charge them anything. There's information, free, and nobody, we're just not that fussed, because that is not really what we do. Which is, again, that is my bitter pill.
Yeah.
This is my problem, right? It annoys me no end. Yeah. So obviously you have to, like you mentioned, you've got your own podcast, the New Mama Mentor podcast, right? Which you host with somebody, I believe.
No, it's just me. And then I have guests on that I talk with. And it's really just, to bring awareness to what resources are available and how you can advocate for yourself or get the help that you need without having to go through the long line of people to get the answers.
Well, which I think has to be the takeaway. Has to be the takeaway that you have to stand up for yourself. And I know it's almost is inevitable. I think it's a generational thing. I think you're clearly much younger than I am. And therefore, your generation of women especially is much better at standing up for themselves than, say, my wife's generation of women is. I'm 48 and my wife's a couple of years older than I am. And they were just told to, you sit down, you shut up, and that sort of thing. I think younger women tend to be much better at it now. But when it comes to postpartum stuff, and especially healthcare societies, there's always a hurdle for almost everyone. And, the science is very, very clear. If I walk into a GP surgery as a middle-aged white guy, and I say, Doc, this is the problem. Doesn't matter whether the doctor is male or female or what race they are, they're going to take me more seriously than they are going to take you. That is the way of the world. The studies all prove this, right?
I mean, we can even prove that through, like, my husband got a vasectomy and he got pain medicine, and I had a baby vaginally and I was told to take Tylenol.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, there's a clue there, right?
Yeah.
Indeed, there's an issue. And if you're a person of color, it's even worse.
Yeah.
And that goes for both the US and the UK and Holland and Germany. This is the way it is absolutely everywhere. Which is admittedly nice for me because I'm a middle-aged white guy, so I'm winning, right?
Right.
But it sucks on many, many other levels. And standing up for yourself is quite often people associate it with complaining. And that really isn't what we're talking about.
Or being difficult.
Yes. And, these things, and especially in the US, you have in healthcare insurance and all that sort of stuff, you're paying for this stuff. And in the UK, you've paid taxes. So it's all free, but...
It is and it isn't, right? You're paying taxes.
Exactly.
So.
It is not free. This is the thing that we have with the NHS. People always go, it's free. Now, you don't pay for the service there and then, but you've already paid for the service.
Right.
There's nothing free. We can save ourselves $100 billion pounds a year just by scrapping the whole thing. But yeah, someone is still paying for it. You've paid for it. So demand what is, in my opinion, rightfully yours. And if you need help, just ask for it.
Yeah. I love like how you said it's just bad customer service. I think if we could look at the medical field as a customer service field, everybody's mindset would be different, because most people have no problem complaining to their cable company when they're not meeting their needs. And so that's because you're paying for a service. And so I think with doctors, we feel like we're not respecting their time because they're so important for whatever reason, but we're still paying for their services. It is definitely a customer service, and you can go elsewhere if they're not going to meet your needs.
Yeah, especially, and like you said, especially with mental health issues.
Yeah.
I mean, you can move tomorrow. And I always say this with regards to personal trainers and physical therapists and all that sort of stuff. One of my clients came to me after having worked with somebody else. And this is years ago. So, and she came to me saying, and she said the breaking up with that personal trainer was almost harder than leaving one of her earlier boyfriends. She borderline lied to the guy about moving house or something like that.
Yeah.
I said, I can't train with you anymore because no, it's like me changing gardeners. As in, literally, it is that simple. You have a business relationship with people. My doctor is not my friend. I have friendly doctors. Don't get me wrong, but my doctor is not my best friend that I have to break up with. My doctor is just someone that says, if this isn't working for me, dude, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. Yeah. Yeah. And that's completely fine. And you're completely within your rights to do so.
Yeah. And I tend to have that conversation with my clients too, which is like, with therapy, it's always hard because like you're going into a room with someone you don't know and you're like, let me tell you all my problems. But give it a few sessions, give it 2 or 3 sessions and make sure that it's not going to be like, okay, great, I can throw everything out on the table. But like, do you feel like this is someone you could talk to? And if it's not, move on, find someone else. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing personal. I always say that as well. Most of my postpartum PT, and as you'll know, the postpartum recovery journey, as we have to call it now, is a fairly intimate one. I say the V word a lot more than most middle-aged white guys do in a non-sexual way. Right? And I do this often at people's houses. So I come to people's houses because, let's be honest, you don't want to go to a gym when you just had a baby because that's half an hour travel. You spend an hour at the gym and a half an hour back. So that's hassle. So I come to people's houses, and then we're talking about vaginas, and we're talking prolapses, and we're talking icky, yucky stuff, and all that sort of thing. And if you're not comfortable with me being in your house,
talking about your vagina,
then you should just go. I'm not sure you're the guy to work with. That's completely fine. I'm not taking that personally. I know that's fairly, even just random. So I don't like certain joiners or painters in my house. Right?
Yeah.
Let alone people that come in and go, so are you wetting yourself?
Right.
That sort of thing. So advocate for yourself and just change things around.
Yeah.
On that happy note, was there anything else you wanted to mention? Because we've covered a lot. But.
I know we have covered a lot. Not necessarily. I do have a free masterclass that I'm doing, and it will be available after the launch date, but it's launching on June 28th, and it's called How to Beat the Overwhelm and Control the Chaos in Motherhood. And it's really talking about like the beginning of sort of your postpartum journey and how your history impacts your mindset in motherhood, and some tips and tricks on how to manage the stress so that you can tackle motherhood from a less overwhelmed mindset. Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I will link to absolutely everything for all the listeners. I will obviously link to all that in the podcast description.
Yeah.
And since this is likely to go out before then anyways, I will make sure I'll post a reminder on social.
Okay, great.
So that people can find it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
On that happy note, I will press stop record. And press stop record as always. When I say I'm going to press stop record, that's exactly what I did. Thanks very much to Allison for coming on. You can find it. I'll obviously link to absolutely everything, right? I will link to her website, Rooted in Harmony Counseling. The podcast is called The New Mama Mentor Podcast. It's a wonderful show. I strongly recommend you give it a listen. Like I said, I will link to her Instagram and her Facebook and all that sort of stuff. I thought it was very engaging, very interesting. I don't mind telling you, I was looking for images to go with the podcast for social and all that sort of stuff. And, I like to use a different image for every podcast, at least on social. And I really struggled to find anything to do with postpartum anxiety. Postpartum depression, I can give you a million images for. Postpartum anxiety is a completely different beast altogether. So that just shows you, we're missing one or two tricks. I will hopefully have the time to do a little blog on the back of this episode as well, with some of the things that Allison mentioned, for those of you who like to read rather than listen. Do we have an in the news this week? I'm sure we do. There must be news this week, right? Let's see what it is. Well, I didn't I didn't expect that. Of course, the main thing in the news is here. You can tell I record these things in advance. I can send them off for approval to whoever I interviewed. And then I add the little in the news this week at the end. And boy, oh boy, did America give us some news this week. Thanks very much to the Supreme Court. I had something lined up, Supreme Court had something lined up already, and then they threw a massive, insane spanner in the works. I'm not going to say too much. Everybody knows my opinion on this sort of stuff. It's insane. I do have for you, though, it's in the podcast description as well, a wonderful pro-choice resource master post. Basically, it's a little file that you can, it'll be in the podcast description. I'll also stick it on all social and all that sort of stuff. All the good quality information out there, links to it that someone put together, helped to get an abortion, loads of organizations listed, subreddits for support and organizing pro-choice charities, get involved in politics. Someone put that together. It's like I said, it's 10 pages of links. If you are looking for anything, if you want to donate, if you want to do anything with regards to any of this sort of stuff, the file is constantly updated. Have a look at the file, download it, share it with everybody, share the link. with everybody. The person who put this together, I don't know whether it's a guy or a girl or what else. It's have a look, share the link with everybody that you know might find it useful, so that they can share it with everybody that you know might find it, that you don't know might find it useful. Right. What I wanted to do for In the News this week is something slightly less important, but still somewhat important. An article in the Telegraph. I'll link to that piece as well, of course. The 5 at-home tests that reveal how fast you are aging. Now, I know a lot of people get really interested in this sort of stuff. This is a piece by Charlotte Lytton, who's written these things before, and she wrote it seemingly with Matt Roberts. He's a personal trainer, and he's kind of the go-to guy for the Telegraph. He writes pieces for them regularly. And they're talking about things like, I don't know, they quote some shitty studies and say, I know, one of the exercises standing on one leg, a Brazilian study found that charting the abilities of 51 to 75-year-olds has found that 1 in 5 people are unable to remain on one leg for this amount of time. And they say that the test should be included in routine health checks. The study apparently said that 123 people died in the 10 years that followed, equivalent to an 84% heightened risk of death when adjusted for underlying conditions, age, and sex were made. And then it says causation is yet to be established. Yeah, because there isn't any. There is no direct link to being able to stand on one leg and living longer. That is not a thing. It just isn't. True, higher levels of fitness mean that you're likely to have better balance in older age and all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't mean that if you just start to stand on one leg, that you'll live longer. And the article goes through this. The next exercise is the plank. And, Cher, apparently, when she was 71, said she can hold a 7-minute plank. A stronger core helps you, blah, blah, blah. And they say, this will keep you younger. And Matt Roberts says, you can test out strength in the core more by doing it by doing a dynamic plank, so by adding movement to the plank position, which we do in the HPMB program anyways. It says it's a fairer test of strength than the pure passive test for lots of people. Yeah, but again, it's going to help you live longer. The plank itself? No, of course it isn't. Standing from a seated position, this is the sit and reach test, which they use a lot to, just find us. You heard that a lot, can you sit up straight from a lotus position and all that sort of stuff. Press-ups is another one that they list. Being able to hit 40 press-ups in a minute lowers heart risk disease by 96%. Yeah, but are they going to do 40 press-ups in a minute? You're out of your mind. That's an insane number. And then grip strength. And the grip strength is an easy one, is an interesting one, because I saw something for this. Someone asked me to sell these things. It's measured using a hand dynamometer. Basically, you squeeze as hard as possible. And, if you are really good at squeezing something, then you're stronger. And people who are stronger, people have a higher level of muscle mass and all that sort of stuff, who are basically saying who exercise regularly and who eat well live longer, right? Now, like I said, I was asked to sell one of these things, mentioned on my podcast and social media, and they offered me quite a good deal, quite a lot of money. But they don't work, right? If you just sit with one of these machines every day, squeezing as hard as you can, improving your grip strength, I suppose, up to a point. That doesn't mean that you live longer, that you're improving health. All you're doing is improving grip strength. This is the difference between someone who knows what they're talking about and someone who knows. To be fair, Matt Roberts knows what he's talking about. He's just selling something, or he's been asked to give stupid quotes for a stupid article. To be fair to him. Because, like I said, he knows what he's talking about. He's a good PT. There is no link that says if you improve your grip strength, you will live longer. If you improve your press-ups, you will live longer. If you improve your standing from a seated position, you will live longer. The exercises in themselves don't directly cause you to live longer. This is all stuff, standing on one leg for balance, plank for core strength, flexibility stuff, is all stuff that says if you have done the right training throughout your life and you stayed active and you're not unhealthily obese and all that sort of stuff, you will live longer. It does not work the other way around. Right? You see this an awful lot with people that are journalists that don't know what they're talking about. They write the article in the wrong way around. None of this stuff is important. If you can stand on one leg for a long time, you can hold a plank for more than a minute and all that sort of stuff. Go standing from a seated position. If you hit 40 press-ups, you're in good shape within a minute. And you have good grip strength with regards to you can do pull-ups and all that sort of stuff. You'll be in good shape. Yes, and it probably means you'll live longer. Because you have done all the other things that lead up to being able to do those things. Right? That is what the point of the article should be. If you keep fit and you keep flexible, you do strength training and all that sort of stuff, you will live longer than someone who doesn't do these things. These individual exercises, however, are not an indicator thereof. If that makes any sense whatsoever. It's like I said, it's a stupid article, but I'm always, whenever I meet someone who's slightly older or sooner or later these things build up a bit of momentum, and someone says, "Oh, Pete, I can't even stand up from the lotus position without using my arms, and that means X, Y, Z." No, it doesn't mean X, Y, Z at all. It just means you can't do that particular movement. It doesn't mean you'll die younger, and if you improve that, you will live longer. It just means you can't do that one thing. Doesn't even mean you're not flexible. It's So please ignore those articles. That's all I'm saying. If you want to do press-ups and these exercises, then do them by all means. But it should not be the basis of your exercise routine. And if you have a good exercise routine, as we always say, you'll live longer anyways, because that's what a good exercise routine is all about when you're training for health. Anyways, that's us done because it's coming up to an hour and 10 minutes with a new bit of music by Volt. I say that with an S, but it's spelled with a Z. You have a tremendous week. Next week, we're talking polycystic ovary syndrome with Court, who's a phenomenal Australian person who absolutely crushed that interview. So I've got that recorded. Like I said, check out the resources that I will link to. Send them on to as many people as you can. Peter at healthypostnatalbody.com. If you have any questions or comments, just want to do whatever, get stuff off your chest, right? Get in touch. Anyways, you have a tremendous week and take care of yourself. Bye now.